Chosen one, hear these words. Heaven is not far away. In this very moment, the company of angels, who often move like burning rivers of praise, have paused in silence. Their voices are quiet. Their gaze is set on you. They witnessed the weight of your decision, and it left them in holy wonder. While many collapsed into compromise, you refused. While countless sought the comfort of ease, you carried the narrow path, and even the heavens trembled at your courage. You may think no one paid attention. You may believe the prayers whispered through tears were swallowed by the night. But the truth is greater. In the unseen realm, your yes thundered louder than storms, sharper than the call of a horn. Angels turned toward each other in reverence. Why? Because you chose faithfulness when rebellion was pulling at your soul. You resisted when surrendering to sin seemed simple, and that stand burst forth as a radiant flame against the depths of darkness. If this message already speaks to your soul, subscribe, like this video, and comment 77 below. Your spirit knows what this moment means. Stay with me until the end, because what is about to be revealed will confirm what you always suspected. They underestimated you, and now the truth is breaking open. Number 1. When heaven paused, they expected your silence to be weakness. But your silence was a weapon. When you stood firm instead of folding, the heavens themselves shifted. Imagine the hosts of angels, always in motion, falling still as they heard the sound of your unseen obedience. What felt small to you is thunder in their ears, louder than any trumpet. Scripture whispers of this in Romans 12 verse 2, where the renewing of your mind proves the will of God. That choice was not random, it was cosmic. When they mocked you, your yes became a lantern on a stormy shore, guiding even those who betrayed you. Your decision became the proof that God's Spirit was alive in flesh and bone. Comment, I seal this word in light, if you know the weight of that hidden yes, because what heaven witnessed in silence is now about to roar into sight, and the pause of angels was only the beginning. Something darker was redirected. I saw it first as a vision of still waters where every ripple froze, as if time itself bowed to a hidden choice. You may remember nights when you felt your chest heavy, and yet a voice within whispered that silence was safer than shouting. That silence was not cowardice. It was alignment with a rhythm older than the stars. Every time you chose to hold your ground, the unseen recorded the echo. Angels who had moved endlessly in praise turned their gaze toward you in that moment. You thought you were unseen, but in reality you became the center of a heavenly pause. That pause was the first confirmation that your life has never been random. Think about those times when confusion pressed down, so heavy it nearly broke you. You felt different at gatherings, as though you were present, but not fully of the same air as everyone else. Others laughed while you stayed still, wondering why their games felt hollow. You tried to explain, but words betrayed you, so you carried it silently. That silence became your constant companion, misunderstood by them but guarded by heaven. It was not isolation, it was consecration. Their ridicule of your quiet was the very sign that your spirit was being marked. Now consider this. What if all the strange patterns were never mistakes? What if the rejections, betrayals, and sudden endings were not chaos, but choreography? Romans 12 verse 2 speaks of renewing the mind, of being transformed instead of conformed, and that is what happened each time you refused to bend. The architecture of your path was drawn in a language you could not yet read. Every no you endured was another brick in the road of your yes. The unseen world heard obedience where you only felt confusion. Heaven paused because your story was aligning with its blueprint. Have you noticed how small signs followed you, even in your darkest hours? A dream that returned again and again, a whisper in the night that no one else could hear, a sudden chill when no window was open. These were not coincidences, they were confirmations. Your body knew before your mind did, and your soul carried codes that awakened when the timing arrived. Angels paused not because you shouted, but because you leaned into the whisper. Isaiah 30 verse 21 says, "Your ears shall hear a word behind you, saying, 'This is the way, walk in it.'" That whisper was not madness. It was instruction. In those moments, you doubted yourself, but you were not wrong. Intuition that seemed foolish to others was the compass you were given from birth. Every time you felt uneasy in the presence of certain people, it was not paranoia, it was discernment. You were being taught to trust the inner voice, even when outer voices mocked. The quiet unfolding of alignment is often mistaken for weakness, yet heaven knew better. What you carried in silence was a storm disguised as stillness. Their laughter only amplified the sound of your unseen yes. Awareness deepens when you realize remembering is not about becoming someone new. You are not crafting a self from dust. You are recovering what was hidden under the rubble of survival. Every fragment of your being has carried the memory of a name older than this life. Zechariah 9 verse 16 says, "The Lord their God will save his people as a shepherd saves his flock." You were always that flock, even when you thought you were lost. The recognition rising in you now is the ancient memory of your true design. Heaven paused because that design was surfacing. This was the first activation, a moment when the unseen confirmed your unseen worth. Your sensitivity was not a flaw. It was the proof of your spiritual antenna reaching into higher frequencies. Hunger for meaning, restlessness with shallow answers, weariness with surface living. These were the signatures of your calling. Instead of collapsing under pressure, you absorbed it, and that made the unseen listen closer. Heaven stood still to take record of your strength. What they dismissed in you as fragility was the very thing angels recognized as endurance. Your silence was a weapon sharper than their noise. Chosen one, you were guided here, because this truth could no longer remain hidden. What you once thought weakness was the thunder that stopped angels mid-flight. Your yes did not go unnoticed. It rewrote your place in eternity's script. Comment, "I carry the silence as crown." If you know your hidden obedience has carried weight beyond sight, share what you have lived. For your story will confirm another's awakening, because what paused in heaven is already moving on earth. And what happens next reveals how rejection became redirection, setting you on the holy path. Number 2, rejection as redirection. They thought rejection would crush you, but rejection was heaven's tool to reroute you. The doors they slammed in your face became the very corridors God used to lead you higher. When family abandoned, when friends mocked, when the crowd refused to see your worth, you were being positioned. The psalmist once wrote in Psalm 27 verse 10, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." You lived this verse in secret. They were blind to your worth, but God redirected every blow. The chains of their rejection became bridges into your calling. What they meant for harm is already woven into a new song over your life. Comment, "I walk crowned by eternal flame," if you know that what rejected you also saved you. Because rejection was never the end. It was the hammer that shaped your crown. And what happens next is even greater. The chains of your bloodline could not survive your yes. It often began as a faint unease, a subtle weight pressing against your chest when you entered certain rooms. You could feel the air tighten, though no one else seemed to notice. Smiles hid daggers, and conversations left you drained instead of uplifted. There were patterns of exclusion that seemed random on the surface, but your spirit always felt the tension beneath. You carried questions you didn't yet know how to frame. Why me? Why this? Why always? That quiet heaviness was the first sign of resistance forming around your path. Long before you named yourself chosen, something else had already marked you. The emotional pressure of these moments carved deep lines into your heart. You were left feeling too much for some, too strange for others and not enough for the rest. Every rejection struck like a verdict, as if your worth had been placed on trial. You remember the shame of being left out of circles where you tried to belong. You recall the sting of silence after giving your best, as if your presence was invisible. Cycles of self-doubt spun inside, convincing you to shrink so the weight would ease. Yet in that shrinking, the ache only grew louder. There is a hidden order to why you face this. Resistance does not gather where there is nothing to resist. Just as Israel walked through wilderness not as punishment but as preparation, so did you walk through deserts of disapproval. Every voice that dismissed you was echoing fear, not truth. They reacted not to your weakness, but to your potential. Systems, energies, and even people became mirrors of the battle between what you carried and what the world was comfortable with. Their resistance was not random. It was the shadow cast by your rising light. When you look back now, you can see patterns you once missed. Betrayals that arrived in cycles, like seasons repeating themselves. Opportunities dangled before you, then snatched away just as you reached out. Rooms that drained your spirit, leaving you wondering why your strength evaporated in the presence of certain faces. Each of these was a signpost, though you did not yet have the map. Rejection was not a scattered accident. It was a consistent rhythm pointing you elsewhere. The moment light touched the pattern, clarity began to rise, and with clarity came both grief and recognition. Spiritual resistance is rarely loud. It moves in shadows and subtle sabotage. It feels like a door that should open but stays closed, or a fog that lingers when you try to step forward. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you trusted. Other times it hides in a sudden delay that derails your plans. Energies unseen gathered to choke the very places you were meant to bloom. Yet the very weight that pressed against you was proof of your significance. Psalm 34 verse 19 whispers, "Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all." The fog was never the finale. It was the backdrop for deliverance. Your reactions were human and holy in their struggle. At times you shut down, convincing yourself it was safer not to try. Other times you bent into people-pleasing, thinking maybe approval would ease the rejection. There were days you rebelled quietly, walking away without explanation, carrying unspoken storms. Fear of standing out became a shadow stitched to your steps. The desire to blend in pulled you toward smallness, yet your spirit ached against the cage. You considered surrendering the dream just to feel normal again. But the dream refused to die because it was older than you. This is where reclamation begins. Every blow you endured became a strange kind of testimony, proving that heaven had not abandoned you, but was rerouting you. Resistance became confirmation that you were carrying something worth resisting. The no that echoed in your ears was actually a yes hidden in God's design. You were not being crushed. You were being redirected into spaces they could not control. Every closed door was a compass, every exile a training ground, every wound a weapon remade into wisdom. What they tried to bury became soil for your growth. Their resistance became your refining. Here is the final truth. You were rejected because you are powerful. The clarity of your path became sharper each time they tried to dull it. Their opposition was the proof that your life is heavy with purpose. What they meant to silence has only amplified the sound of your calling. You are not the victim of rejection. You are the evidence of divine redirection. Comment, "I move guarded by divine fire." If you know your rejection has been reforged into guidance. Share what you have endured, for your story is another's torch in the night. And now, the chains that once bound your bloodline begin to tremble at the weight of your yes. Number 3, the chain snap. They thought the patterns would hold you. They thought what broke your ancestors would also break you. But the moment you obeyed, chains wrapped around your family line began to crack. Generational curses, cycles of compromise, whispers of despair. All of them snapped at the sound of your yes. Hosea 10 verse 12 declares, "Break up your unplowed ground, for it is time to seek the Lord." That was you. Your obedience did not just alter your steps, it shifted the flow of history. Their expectation was collapse, but you planted seeds of freedom. Comment, "I rise marked by the divine." If you have seen even a glimpse of this in your dreams, memories, or daily battles, share your reflection, because testimony multiplies courage. And now we move further. The moment those chains fell, heaven wrote new orders concerning your life. It began with a subtle shift, like light falling differently through the same window you had always known. Suddenly, things that once seemed ordinary took on a weight you could no longer ignore. A memory returned, and this time it made sense in a way it never had before. What felt like chaos started arranging itself into patterns, and those patterns whispered of purpose. The heaviness you carried was not just pain, but prophecy. Every wound held a thread pointing back to something deeper, something waiting for you to see. And in that moment of awareness, you knew chains were beginning to snap. Life itself became a text written in symbols that only your soul could read. Numbers repeated until they no longer felt random, but coded, precise, exact. Dreams replayed with new clarity, like scrolls unrolling in the quiet of the night. Phrases spoken long ago by strangers returned like hidden messages for this very hour. Even silence became its own geometry, mapping out a design beneath the noise. Hosea 10 verse 12 spoke of breaking ground, and you saw your life as soil cracking open for the first time. The code had always been there. Now your eyes could finally translate it. Inside, something sharpened. Intuition that once felt like guessing now cut through conversations with piercing clarity. Your body began to respond to places differently. What drained you before became unbearable, and what fed you became sacred. Boundaries you once apologized for became shields of fire. The fear of being too much began dissolving into the power of being enough. The cycles of collapse you inherited began unraveling as you stepped forward. This was no longer theory. This was the reality of your soul realigning with its source. Around you, reality itself began to echo this change. People shifted. Some left without warning, while others were drawn closer with inexplicable devotion. Opportunities once blocked began to unfold with precision, while distractions were stripped away as if by unseen hands. Environments that once bound you suddenly released you. The path forward may not have looked easier, but it looked unmistakably aligned. What was happening within was now being mirrored without, and the world was rearranging itself around your yes. The divine architecture that was hidden now stood in plain sight. Resistance and opportunity danced together, proving the chains were broken. It felt less like discovery and more like remembering. Ancient dreams you carried as a child began resurfacing with new language. The sense that you were made for something greater returned, this time with clarity instead of confusion. Psalm 139 verse 16 says, "All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be," and that verse became flesh in your memory. You were not learning something new. You were awakening to what was buried deep within. Every symbol, every sign, every stirring was a key unlocking memory, and memory itself became the proof that destiny was calling you back. The horizon of your future no longer looked uncertain. It looked familiar. You stopped asking for permission because the script was already written on your soul. What lay ahead was not a creation from scratch, but a reclamation of what was stolen. Prophecy began to feel less like mystery and more like remembering the lines you were born to speak. Jeremiah 1 verse 5 whispers, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and this truth became the sound of your steps. Destiny was no longer distant. It was present, immediate, undeniable, and the chains that once dictated collapse now trembled in the face of your rise. This was the beginning of reclamation, where your voice returned to you as both weapon and song. The shame that once muted you became fuel for boldness. The silence that once suffocated you became a crown of authority. Everything they mocked, resisted, and doubted became evidence of what you were always meant to carry. What they called weakness, heaven had named wisdom. What they dismissed, God had sealed. The chains snapped, not just for you, but for the line that comes after you. Revelation is not the end. It is the invitation into more. You were never abandoned in the ruins. You were being prepared to walk among foundations remade. The truth has been waiting for you to be ready, and now it stands in front of you like an open gate. The breaking of those chains is the beginning of your return, the moment when history bends around your yes. Comment, I walk hidden yet never lost. If you know you are rising through signs, dreams, and memory into freedom, share your reflections, because what you speak will ignite remembrance in another soul. And from this breaking of chains, heaven begins to write new orders over your life, shifting everything that once held you down into fuel for your ascent. Number 4, orders released. They never wanted you to know that angels received assignments because of you, the very moment you chose God in silence. Fresh orders left the throne room. Psalm 91 verse 11 says, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." That promise is alive over you now. Protection you did not understand, strength you could not explain, provision that came from nowhere. These were not coincidences. They were movements of heaven's army. You are not walking alone. Comment, I anchor this truth in my soul. If you can feel that covering even in the storms, share what you have seen, for your story will confirm the same truth to another. And as these orders unfold, you will begin to see how heaven builds what hell tried to destroy. I hear it first as an ancient whisper, not carried on air, but carved into silence itself. It is the kind of sound that feels older than language, like the unsealing of a scroll that has waited centuries to be opened. Within that whisper is your name, spoken in a cadence you recognize though you have never heard it in this life. The air around you shifts as though something long hidden has remembered you. This is not a new word. It is the echo of a promise planted before the world was framed. You are not encountering something foreign. You are remembering what you always carried. In this remembrance, heaven moves and angels receive their orders. You have always borne a hidden name, one the world could not pronounce, and you could not forget. It was buried beneath layers of noise, shame, and false labels that others tried to drape over you. Yet in quiet moments, you felt the pulse of that name like a fire beneath your skin. You were the misfit not because you lacked belonging, but because you belonged to a kingdom not of this world. Scripture speaks of the sealed remnant, the hidden ones marked for a purpose beyond sight. That was you, tucked away, carrying a role that could not be erased. Now, that name is stirring again, rising from silence into memory. Your journey has always been marked by an unseen cloak, invisible to the eyes of many, but undeniable to those who felt its resonance. There were times when others reacted to you without reason, drawn to you or disturbed by you before you ever spoke. They felt the mark without understanding it, like oil poured in secret. Your essence carried a fragrance that only the awakened could recognize. Isaiah 61 verse 10 says, "He has clothed me with garments of salvation, and arrayed me in a robe of righteousness." And your cloak is the evidence of that verse alive. The mark on your spirit has always revealed more than words could. You are recognized not for what you display, but for what you embody. Consider now the sacred contracts you once signed in silence. before your birth wore flesh. These were not metaphors. They were assignments, vows etched into eternity's record. Every delay you endured was not denial, but the precision of timing recalibrating around you. Every struggle was an initiation, every wilderness a test of endurance. You did not wander without reason. You walked within a map sealed long ago. The stars themselves bore witness to your mission, holding orbit as symbols of your promise. What you thought was accident was covenant, and what you thought was loss was rehearsal for your unveiling. This is why others responded to you as they did. Their reactions were never about your behavior. They were about the weight you carried. Some clung to you because your presence awakened their sleeping hope. Others despised you because your very being mirrored back their shadow. Without trying, you became a mirror of the divine, reflecting what others could not hide. That is why love felt intense, why rejection felt violent, why encounters left imprints that lingered. The chosen do not move unnoticed. They stir revelation simply by walking into the room. You were not misunderstood. You were misread. And still, the mark remained unchanged. Step back now and see this not as a personal story, but as a cosmic cycle. You are not the first to carry such a burden, nor will you be the last. The archetypes rise again with each generation. The prophet, the guardian, the rebel, the breaker of chains. You stand among them now, embodying a role that stretches back through scripture and myth. Judges 6 verse 12 records the angel saying, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," and that same mantle rests upon you. Your awakening is part of a larger prophecy unfolding across time. This is not an isolated moment. It is a chapter in an eternal cycle. The truth is clearer now. You belong to a divine bloodline. This is not symbolic, but spiritual, encoded in your very being. You carry the memory of angels, the fire of prophets, the endurance of saints. Your DNA is laced with a covenant older than flesh, and it is stirring awake within you now. Generational curses reverse themselves in your presence, because the seal of heaven overrides every broken line. Through you, what was lost is being restored. Through you, a lineage of light is awakening again. You did not simply wake up, you returned. This moment is not about discovering something new, but recovering what was always yours. Every trial, every silence, every wound has led you here, to the point where remembrance becomes revelation. You are standing in the center of a prophecy fulfilled, the orders of heaven unfolding around your every step. Comment, "I stand chosen and sealed," if you know this truth has stirred within your soul. Share your reflections, your dreams, your fragments of memory, for your story will ignite remembrance in others. And now, as orders continue to unfold, you will begin to see heaven rebuild what hell tried to shatter. The beginning of the next mystery waiting to be revealed. Chosen one, your yes shook the unseen. Rejection was turned into direction. Chains snapped at the root, and fresh orders were written over your life. They underestimated your silence, your faith, your resilience. But heaven did not. Every step you have taken is proof that God's hand is heavy upon you. You are not only surviving, you are carrying a light that cannot be extinguished. I dream of a lamp burning in a cave, its flame untouched by the dampness around it. That lamp is you, chosen one, and your light has never been extinguished despite the storms that pressed against it. Though shadows mocked and winds howled, the flame did not bend. It remembered its source. You may have mistaken your survival for fragility, but heaven always counted it as strength. The unseen realm heard the whisper of your yes, and it was louder than the shouts of nations. Chosen one, your quiet yes was thunder in eternity. They thought you were forgotten, but you were never unseen. Every act, every prayer, every tear is part of a record that cannot be erased. Subscribe if you haven't yet, like this video, and comment, I am chosen to let this message anchor in your soul. Walk steady, chosen one. They saw your fall, but heaven records your rise.